And now for an explanation. And I'm sorry, this won't be fun.
Say something, I'm giving up on you.
Writing this during the holidays sucked. This is something like the 10th draft, and that's just what I managed to get written down before dropping into depression. So aside from a few posts on my various social feeds across the internet, mostly on Tumblr and FimFiction, I've been fairly dead on the internet. Well, more like lurking, but there's several places I've just stopped even looking. And there's a few people who know me, but not my wife of 16 years, who may be wondering, why? After all, I was starting to gather an audience for my Tumblr blog, 365 Life Hacks. I had a loyal following of my reviews on FimFiction. I was working on a new webcomic that doubled as advocacy for open source software. I had a writing project that I was plugging away on. Then it all stopped near the end of January in 2015. That's the day my wife walked out and took our daughter with her. Now, I need to say right off the bat that this video is about my experience. I can't say what my ex-wife's motivations were, mostly because she won't actually talk to me, nor can I say what she's been up to since January of 2015. I know if you talk to her, you'd get a different story from mine. I want to drop a bit of advice right now before I go any further. If you're single, as in never been married single, don't rush into a marriage. I'm speaking specifically to members of the church, as in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because I think the culture of the church hammers into people way too hard that they need to get married, and the closer to the moment when you're considered legally an adult, the better. This puts immense pressure on people who are really just kids to rush into something that will quite literally impact everything forever. Okay, I'm gonna get off that tangent now. If my work on this video goes well, it should come out on or fairly close to the anniversary of my ex leaving, which brings me back to January 2015. So I've often said throughout the course of our marriage that had my wife and I known each other for just 6 months longer before we got engaged, we probably never would have gotten married. That's because it wasn't until 6 months after we were married that we really started to discover just who it was we married. Honestly, the self-discovery that was supposed to happen first didn't come until much later. At some point in the last 4 years, my ex-wife just decided to stop investing in the marriage. I didn't find this out until after January 2015, by the way. I'll admit I was blind, willfully so. I was so sure that we were both on board the same boat and had a course charted for successful marriage or die trying that I never noticed her getting ready to abandon ship. When we had our daughter back in 2008, I was confident that she'd finally locked herself in. I ignored the niggling doubts that kept creeping up on me. Big mistake. Not that I should have been suspicious of her, but that I should have used the various counselors that we went to as an opportunity to air these doubts, to use a safe space to say things like, I'm scared you just married me because you were supposed to, that you just wanted a husband that would somehow save you from everything you're unwilling to face about yourself, that you got married so that you could have a baby, and so on and so on. Maybe if I'd confronted her early, especially before we had our daughter, we wouldn't have gotten to the point where she turned her back on me. By the way, I openly acknowledge I didn't make it easy on her. In fact, I know for sure it was probably the hardest thing she could imagine doing, being married to me. When we got married, I was emotionally immature. I had a staggering intellect without any real-world experience to temper it, 0 people skills, and a towering ego that would have made Tony Stark jealous. On the other hand, I had the hardest challenge I could ever have faced just in getting and staying married, letting her in. See, when I was a kid, just 3 years old, my parents got divorced. Oddly, I'm not upset at either of them. Sure, I get exasperated with my dad, and my mom and I can get into hours-long debates, but that's just because of who we are, not because of any issues that came out of the divorce. In fact, pretty much everyone who's directly involved agrees it was probably for the best, regardless of how hard it was for everyone afterward. I didn't even register any upset for years, until my stepmother entered the picture. There's lots more about that particular story, including abuse that was so severe I've mentally blocked it out to this day and had to get treatment for PTSD that resulted from it. The key point here is that I did develop issues with abandonment about my extended family. See, part of the equation was my dad got into a life-threatening accident with health repercussions he still suffers from today. I was smart, even as a kid, and I figured out, even at the age of 7, that he was in no way capable of taking care of my sister and I. My mom was several states away and probably wouldn't hear about the accident until well after she could even think about doing anything to help. This was before the internet, remember, and the only person local to us was a woman who my dad had been dating for a few months. A woman who would manipulate and lie her way into and out of marriage to my dad, destroying our family so thoroughly that I had to learn what a family even was from a foster family I was placed with for a year. A woman who would abuse me so thoroughly that it wouldn't be until I was in my early 30s that I felt I was able to move on and consider that part of my life to be over. And throughout all that, my extended family was pretty much AWOL. Sure, I get that there were many factors that kept them from doing much, if anything, but they were just not there. Through the most pain-filled, terrifying times in my life, a time that would be so nightmare-inducing that I would find The Walking Dead to be rather pedestrian and the post-apocalyptic setting to be rather dull, my extended family was not there at all. I couldn't even tell you their names until I was in my 20s, and I was completely unaware that I had an uncle on my dad's side. When you have that much pain from close relationships and the lack thereof, you tend to wall people off, and I'm willing to wager that only one, maybe two people at my work know anything about me besides that one guy who's really tall and does the boxes. I'm just that good at shutting people out, and I don't even do it consciously. Which sucks when you've got a business that relies on connecting with people, but that's a topic for another video. So letting someone in after all of that, of letting them know your deepest, darkest, scariest parts of yourself, let's just say if you don't know what it's like, you'll probably never know. The closest I can think would be that feeling you get when you're watching Charlie Brown go after that damn ball for the umpteenth time and you just know that that bitch Lucy's going to whip the ball away at the last second, but Charlie tries anyway because he just hopes that this time will be different and the viewer knows he's going to miss the ball every single time. That feeling! The one you're feeling right now, the one that says, I'd never try to kick the ball she's holding, the feeling that burns in anger and embarrassment for Charlie Brown, that feeling is just the tiniest, teeniest glimmer of a reflection of a distant candle that itself doesn't even compare to the blazing blue giant that is the distrust people like myself have for the rest of humankind. When I say it's an abused introvert thing you wouldn't understand, I'm not being flip. There's just no frame of reference for the vast majority of humanity to what I've been through, so trying to give you a real idea of what it would be like making an apple pie from a recipe by Carl Sagan. I'd have to go back to basics so far to explain so much, you'd lose the meme before we even got halfway there. Getting past a hurdle like that in a relationship is damned hard, but not impossible. I managed to overcome it and let my wife in. I told her everything. I let her know my hopes, my dreams. I confided in her my greatest challenges and invited her to participate in celebrating my triumphs. And I did my best to help her. I cheered her on when she tried a new venture. I helped her research new passions. I tried to create a safe emotional space for her to confess her own fears and doubts. I took jobs I probably shouldn't have because I knew having that job would make her happy. I shut down businesses that I had started and was passionate about because she couldn't handle the thought of risking our futures on the gamble of self-employment. I want to say again that I didn't make it easy for her. After all, she was dealing with an abuse victim and a child of a broken home, and I mean child. When I say I was immature, I may have been understating it. As I implied earlier, I couldn't tell you exactly why she left. I have suspicions which will in no way match up to what she says because, well, I'll try to explain. We're all the average of our 5 closest associations. By that I mean the people you're around the most and allow yourself to be influenced by. Deep in debt and can't make bills and can't figure out why it keeps happening? Chances are each of the 5 people you're closest to on a daily basis are also neck deep in debt and run out of money before the end of the month. Marriage is on the rocks and divorce is imminent? Check your 5 closest friends, chances are they're divorced or are on their way there. Back in 2012, I joined a mentorship team. I recognized that my whole life wasn't going where I wanted it to, and I knew I needed guidance in the areas that mattered most. I had squandered previous opportunities to have good mentors, and when the team I'm on now came across my path, I took to it like a man dying of thirst in the desert. Since I had enough crap in my past that was going to factor in keeping me from the success I wanted, I consciously and deliberately cut out people in my life who would be negative influences. Those who I couldn't completely excise, I limited my contact as much as possible and sought out people who had the kind of success in their lives that I wanted in mine. My ex, however, chose the path of the SNIOP. That's susceptible to the negative influences of other people. You need counselors and mentors in your life. I learned this the hard way. But if you don't choose these from positive people, you're not creating fertile soil for growth in your life. You're salting the earth and wondering why the fruit trees of success don't take root. She chose some of the most negative people to associate with. Why? Because they are her family. Seriously, one of these people was ready to consciously and willfully lie and slander under oath during our divorce proceedings if it went to trial. This group of people disliked me from the start, and it's obvious to me from all the, quote, reasons, close quote, for the divorce cited by my ex-wife that they all came from them. How do I know this? Here's what my ex-wife cited as the reasons for my divorce. I was physically abusive to both my wife and daughter, I was mentally abusive to both my wife and daughter, and I was emotionally abusive to both my wife and daughter. I'd like to point out that an officer of the court interviewed both me and my ex and determined that there was no evidence for abuse, period. She even spent extra time with us above and beyond what we were scheduled for because she wanted to make as informed a decision as possible, short of a complete CPS and criminal investigation. Now let's flash back to year 1 of our marriage. The first time my in-laws spent a week of vacation with us, I was accused of abusing my wife by my in-laws. There was a period of time my wife wouldn't even talk to her family because they kept accusing me of abusing her when she knew the accusations were false. So what do I think the actual reasons for the divorce were? Two things. First off, I am transgendered. Sorry to anyone who this is a surprise to, but honestly it's kind of been all over the interwebs for about 5 years now, since I fully accepted that's part of who I am. While that's a topic for another video, it's relevant here because it's been an issue for pretty much our entire marriage. The topic was broached poorly. I was still in denial for the first couple of years, and there was and still is a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt on the part of my ex-wife. And there were a few issues that she had that were bundled in on her side of the issue that aren't appropriate for me to talk about with anyone but her and God. Ultimately, I think this was the major driving factor for her, as being married to a man who wanted to be a woman didn't fit with her childhood image of a perfect husband. Second, the negative person cannot be around a positive person and perceive them in a positive light. Everything the positive person does and says is going to be perceived as negative by the negative person. There's simply no getting around this. Oftentimes, the negative person will try to turn the positive person negative in order to reduce the discomfort they feel. I love you becomes I'd love you if. You're beautiful gets mangled by the filter of but I'm ugly, fat, unworthy, or not good enough. You're perfect for me turns into nobody else would want you. I did this for you is assumed to mean and now you need to do something for me. For me, this was best indicated by who was starting the fights. What, you think I'm going to hide the fact that we fought? We were married. Of course we fought. During the first, half of our marriage, I started pretty much all the fights. Remember what I said about emotional immaturity? Yeah, this is what I was talking about. All I knew about marriage, save for 1 year with a foster family, was fighting and arguments. It didn't help that I simply didn't know how to communicate properly, nor did it help that I simply didn't understand that if you didn't agree with me, then you weren't necessarily trying to attack me. Man, I was such a dick. Anyway, once we'd crossed, I want to say the 8-year mark, my wife started pitching in on starting the fights. In a sad way, this was really the only way we got any real, actual communication done between us. Starting back in the beginning of 2014, though, I'd had a bit of a revelation. I read in a book about communication, a Zig Ziglar work if I recall correctly, that communication isn't about what you say, it's about what the other person hears. It was like a light had been turned on for me and I was viewing all the arguments with my wife in a whole new light. And from that point forward, whenever she started to argue with me, I'd simply stop her. I flat out refused to fight. Then I'd ask her what she heard. The vast majority of the time, and when I say that I mean upwards of 90% at least, if not 95% of what she heard only had peripheral relation to what I'd actually said, let alone what I meant. I'd restate, the argument was completely diffused, and we'd move on until she'd start arguing with me again, then I'd have to stop the argument again, and so on. She'd gotten so used to the arguments that they were normal. The combative marriage we'd grown over 15 years was all she knew of our relationship, and here was her husband shutting off the primary communication method we'd used for years. So yeah, we're divorced. And I didn't want to get a divorce. The better part of the last 2 years of our marriage was me trying to make myself a better husband and provider for her so that she could have that perfect marriage that she'd feel comfortable in. I was working to create the safest emotional space I could so that we could do a real deep dive into the things that were still dividing us. I wanted us to find a way to succeed against all the odds. And I still love her. The whole thing hurts. Honestly, one of the tools that's helped me the most, and I'm so grateful I watched it before this whole thing happened, is Silver Quill's video on the grieving process. Just to cope, I've had to put myself in a mental place where the woman I divorced is not the woman I married and fell in love with. Of course, I recognize that they must be the same, but my emotional core just sort of breaks down when I try to connect the actions and words of the woman who's put me through this divorce with the woman I spent 17 years falling more and more in love with. So am I mad? Well, yes and no. I'm angry that I was flat out falsely accused of doing one of the most heinous things a spouse or parent can do, but given she accused me of much worse during our marriage, and I was totally willing to forgive her for all that, this isn't really that big a deal for me. It does help that the false accusations never came of anything really, so the worst of the damage that could have happened never did. No sense crying for vengeance that just isn't necessary. I do hope she learns from the experience, but that's up to her. What I'm really angry about, though, is that I can't even look at the gifts she gave me, especially in the last 4 years, without wondering if she was just playing me the entire time. I use my favorite skillet, and every so often the thought pops into my head. How much of her giving me this was an actual gift, and how much of it was just a holding action while she got ready to betray me? I hold a cookbook she got me and think, did she even care that I only wanted this for the recipe on page 90 that she wanted me to make her, or did I get this because she was trying to be a, quote, good wife, close quote? Pretty much everything touched by her now comes with a price of pain. I haven't been able to watch Doctor Who without feeling completely bittersweet about everything to do with it now, because pretty much everything about the modern show from Doctor Number 9 to present had so much to do with how much we both loved the show together. I'm really angry that there's so much potential that's now gone. Speaking of Doctor Who, there's an episode called The Rings of Akhenaten, wherein the Doctor kills a demigod who's been gorging on the time essence of innocent sacrifices for millennia by force-feeding it the time essence of the unlimited potential of what happens next.
Still hungry? Well, I brought something for you. This. The most important leaf in human history. The most important leaf in human history. It's full of stories, full of history. And full of a future that never got lived. Days that should have been that never were. Passed on to me. This leaf isn't just the past. It's a whole future that never happened. There are billions and millions of unlived days for every day we live, an infinity. All the days that never came. And these are all my mum's.
Well, come on then. Eat up. You full? I expect so. Because there's quite a difference, isn't there, between what was and what should have been. There's an awful lot of one, but there's an infinity of the other. An infinity is too much. Even for your appetite.
What we were was wonderful. It was odds-defying. It was the start of an adventure. It was the beginning of the greatest thing we'd ever done. Then, with one decision, she destroyed that. She made herself into an aging single adult in the church. She made our daughter into yet another child of a broken home. She made me into just another transgendered person whose marriage fell apart. She took our marriage and turned it into a statistic. Unless you think something like, oh, well, you went along with it, you didn't fight for it, so you were part of the decision, keep in mind that Arizona is an at-will marriage state. Either party can request a divorce, and the courts are required only to go through with the process. After that, the marriage is over. and my ex-wife was the one who chose the divorce. Do I want her back in my life? Oh, in the worst way. She'd have to show me some changes, though. First and foremost, she'd have to acknowledge that she was the one who ended the marriage. The few times she's actually spoken to me about the divorce at all, she always points the blame squarely at me. While I will take responsibility for what I did do, including the years I made her miserable in her own home, something I desperately tried to make for in the last 2 years, I refuse to accept any blame or responsibility for the divorce. My goal during the entire time she was making plans behind my back to leave me and take our daughter was to make our marriage stronger and match up the intent to actions and words. Until she stops blaming me for her choices, there's going to be no place at the table for either of us, because she won't want to be there and I'll be defending myself in a kangaroo court, being tried for a crime I didn't commit. Next, she'd have to show that she's choosing not to be a SNIOP. Unless she's changed that, it wouldn't matter how good her intentions were for coming back to me, we'd still be back at the same spot in less than a year. Finally, she'd have to join me in relationship counseling for at least a year before we could even start dating again. She's carrying a lot of anger towards me, and that needs to come out and be dealt with. Hell, I'd like to do this part just for our daughter's sake, whether we got back together or not. Oh, and one last message to my ex-wife, if you happen to be watching this. I know you disagree with pretty much everything I've said in this video. I could probably write the script for what your reaction is and be 90% correct on even the wording that you'd choose. You didn't walk out that long ago, and I know the people you've spent most of your time around and what comes out of their mouths and into your brain. I know what your comfort zone is, and I can see that you're not even attempting to grow beyond it. You chose out of having input into my life and the things I have to say and feel. If you want to tell me your side and actually stay in the conversation until it's over, that's fine. Arrange the time and place and we'll talk. You know my conditions. To everyone else, I promise this will be the most depressing video I will ever do.
When I look into your eyes, it's like watching the night sky or a beautiful sunrise. Well, there's so much they hold, and just like them old stars, I see that you've come so far to be right where you are. How old is your soul? Well, I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. I'm still looking up, and when you're needing your space to do some navigating,